I want you to picture the greatest moment of your life so far. This might range from scoring an important goal to achieving the required grades to get into university, or perhaps having a child or getting a major promotion at work. But what if you lived through this incredible experience and yet you are entirely blind to the fact that it ever actually took place? Well, on that note, let me introduce you to Steve Thompson. It's the 22nd of November 2003. The Stadium Australia in Sydney presents an intense cacophony of noise as 83,000 onlookers eagerly cheer on Australia and England in the Rugby World Cup final. With 28 seconds remaining, the two teams are neck and neck, with the score sitting at 17 all. The ball is passed back to England's Johnny Wilkinson before he proceeds to execute a perfect drop kick to give his side a 3-point lead. The elation amongst the England team is tangible as players jump into the air with arms raised, celebrating the nation's first ever Rugby World Cup triumph. Steve Thompson hugs his teammates in delight, cherishing the moment of reaching the summit. A memory that he wouldn't forget, or so he believed. So why exactly do contact sports leave athletes susceptible to diseases such as chronic traumatic encephalopathy, dementia and even Parkinson's? Well, firstly, let's establish what CTE actually is. It's a brain condition that is likely linked to repeated head injuries. The brain's nerve cells become damaged, which leads to a protein called tau being released. If enough of it is released, it can build up into clumps, killing brain cells simultaneously. CTE symptoms usually include memory loss, impaired judgment, aggression, depression and anxiety as the brain ultimately shrinks and decays. In Steve Thompson's case, he played as a hooker, being one of 8 forwards within the team. Often, hookers will find themselves launched into rucks, placing a great toll on the body and exposing the player to sizable hits and possible concussions. The studies conducted on rugby players regarding a link between the sport and brain diseases aren't numerous when compared to boxing and MMA. Yet, the few academic articles carried out do indeed find links between repeated concussions sustained in the course of rugby and CTE. If we jump across the pond now, we see an increased focus on how impact sports are harming the human brain. Perhaps the most comparable sport to rugby is football in the NFL, with the main distinction coming from the players sporting helmets and padding. Unfortunately, as opposed to providing increased protection to the participants, it has ultimately led to larger hits and a greater force being exerted during tackles. When a helmet clashes with another, it does protect the skull from being fractured, but it fails to prevent the brain from rattling around inside the skull, the basis behind a concussion. Therefore, the helmet appears to partially facilitate CTE through preventing a clear, tangible injury from occurring and concealing constant knocks to the brain from within the skull. Mike Webster, a former center who played with the Pittsburgh Steelers and Kansas City Chiefs between 1974 and 1990, displayed evident signs of dementia and bouts of depression before his death.
The things we do to one another, okay? Hell, I don't know what I'm saying. I'm just tired and confused right now.
Perhaps the scariest link is the recent study conducted on 266 deceased American football players. This found that 223 of the participants met the neuropathological diagnostic criteria for CTE. Consequently, the odds of an individual getting CTE doubles every 2.6 years of playing football, a truly damning statistic. But what can actually be done about this issue? After all, there appears to be an inextricable link between contact sports and brain injuries. Well, innovative solutions have been put forward throughout every sport, spanning from the 0-1 helmet for football players, which aims to diminish linear and angular forces on the head. Meanwhile, in rugby, we are seeing stricter guidelines on players being removed from the field at the slightest sign of even a headache. But ultimately, the research surrounding dementia and CTE is still very much in its infancy, with proper scholarly articles only addressing the issue within the last 10 years. It was only in 2005 when the first case of CTE was described in an American football player. Therefore, far more funding should be dedicated to researching both the factors behind CTE development and potential remedies and safeguards to deploy. In 1928, Dr. Harrison Martland used the term punch drunk to describe boxers suffering from symptoms he believed to be related to the repetitive blows they received in the ring. Then, in 1937, J. A. Millspock, a naval medical officer, first coined the term Dementia pugilistica, otherwise known as CTE. In comparison to other sports, diseases like CTE and dementia were identified early, and extensive studies were carried out to determine how a career in which the sole objective was to knock someone out whilst avoiding counterpunches would take its toll on the brain's function. Just kidding. In spite of obvious and consistent signs of brain damage in boxing amongst prize fighters, there was little action taken to mitigate the heavy burden. The lack of one unified boxing board has stifled the imposition of sizable safety measures, with the only universal change really coming from reducing the number of rounds. In 1893, there was a boxing match between Andy Bowen and Jack Burke, lasting a total of 110 rounds. Current boxing championship title fights last for 12 rounds, but although the number has decreased significantly, the flurry of punches unleashed and overall intensity has left persistent concussions as a pressing issue. Devices are now being tested which actually detect when a boxer's brain has hit the skull, and the results are sent to an app which could be handy for boxers to wear during sparring rounds. But it doesn't seem massively feasible to wear during an actual boxing match. Regardless, with many brain injuries, the time in which medical attention is received afterwards can be the determining factor in preventing lasting consequences from occurring. There are obvious steps that can be taken during training, including wearing headgear to spar, as well as sparring less often to reduce the consistency of the hits to the head. In the ring, more pressure should be put on referees to stop bouts before defenceless fighters incur costly and lasting damage, along with compulsory MRI head scans on all fighters post-fights. Shining a torch into a boxer's eyes simply isn't enough. I could honestly delve far deeper into this topic regarding CTE and combat sports specifically, but I'd prefer to fully address it in another video. Ultimately, what I wanted to highlight in this video is that, regardless of any significant changes in contact sports, CTE will still remain to lurk beneath the surface, eating away at the brains of athletes who, although not fully realising it, are sacrificing their well-being and livelihood to entertain adoring fans. There will always be an inherent risk of brain disease associated with these sports, and that is why these men and women deserve the utmost respect for putting on a spectacle. What do you guys think of this issue surrounding CTE and contact sports? Are athletes really condemned to the scrap heap in this regard, or can something significant be done? Let me know in the comments, and please like and subscribe. Cheers.